Hello, church. Thank you for joining me today. We're in the study in the book of James, and we've entitled it The Next Right Thing. Today we're going to be looking at how to handle temptation, and it's in James chapter 1, 13 through 18. I know that last week and this week got kind of out of order, so we're kind of going back a couple of verses. As we look at our next right thing to do in our Christian development, James is leading us in this section about a discussion of temptation. Now, a mature person is patient in trials. Sometimes I'm not that patient. Sometimes the trials are testings on the outside, and sometimes they're temptations on the inside. Now, trials may be tests sent from God, or they may be temptations sent by Satan. So why did James connect the relationship between testings on the outside and temptations on the inside? If we're not careful, the testings on the outside may become temptations on the inside. When we are facing difficult circumstances, we may find ourselves complaining against God, questioning His love, resisting His will. Now, at that point, Satan provides us with an opportunity to escape the difficulty. Now, this is an opportunity. He puts temptation out there. That the opportunity is a temptation. The nation of Israel often turned testings into temptation. They left Egypt, and on their way, the water supply ran out. And when they did finally find water, it was bitter and they couldn't drink it. So they immediately begin to grumble against God, complaining, blaming God. They turned the test into a temptation, and they failed the test. God doesn't want us to give in to temptation. However, He doesn't spare us the experience of temptation. If we are to mature, we must face testings and temptations. Now, there are three facts to consider if we're going to overcome temptation in James chapter 1, verse 13 through 18. And remember, when you are being tempted, do not say, God is tempting me. God is never tempted to do wrong, and He never tempts anyone else. Temptations come from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. So don't be misled, my dear brothers and sisters. Whatever is good and perfect is a gift coming down to us from God our Father, who created all the lights in the heavens. He never changes or casts a shifting shadow. He chose to give birth to us by giving us His true word. And we, out of all creation, became His prized possession. Our first fact to consider starts off with a negative approach. Now I know it's not always the best thing to lead with a negative, but it's an important one to consider. We should consider God's judgment. When we're faced with temptation, James is saying, look ahead and see where sin leads. It leads to death. Also, don't blame God for your temptations. God is too holy to be tempted and too loving to tempt others. Now, God does test us, but He never tempts us. We are the ones who turn the testings into temptations. A temptation is an opportunity to accomplish a good thing in a bad way. Is it wrong to want to pass an examination? Of course not. But if you cheat to pass, then you have sinned. The temptation to cheat is an opportunity to accomplish a good thing, but in a bad way. Now, we think of sin as a single act. Oh, they sinned. But God sees it as a process. James describes this process in 4 stages. Stage 1, desire. James chapter 1, first part of 14. Temptation comes from our own desires. The normal desires of life were given to us by God and really aren't sinful. If we never felt hungry or thirsty, we would never eat or drink, and we would die, the desire to eat and drink. Without fatigue, the body would never rest and eventually wear out and die. Sex is a normal desire. Without it, the human race couldn't continue. The whole race would die. We get into trouble when we try to satisfy these desires in ways outside of God's will. Eating is normal. Gluttony is sinful. Sleep is normal. Laziness is sinful. Sex is normal. Outside of marriage, it's sinful. Now, the secret is constant control. Desires must be our servants, not our masters. This we could do through Jesus' strength. He's always here to help us. Stage 1, desire. Stage 2, enticement. James chapter 1, verse 14. Temptations come from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. The word entices in the Greek means to bait a hook, put a little worm on. The hunter and the fisherman have to use bait to catch their prey. No animal will deliberately step into a trap or on a trap, or a fish will knowingly bite a naked hook. So the idea is that the trap is hidden, the hook is hidden. Temptation always carries with it some bait that appeals to our natural desires. The bait not only attracts us, but it also hides the fact that as we give in to the desires, it will eventually bring sorrow and punishment. When Jesus was tempted, he dealt with temptation by using the Word of God. 3 times he said, "It is written." He didn't say, "I'm God, get away." He just said, "It is written," it's down. When you know the Bible, you can detect the bait and deal with it. This is walking by faith, not by sight. That's where the rubber meets the road. So the 4 stages of sin: stage 1, desire; stage 2, enticement; then stage 3, disobedience. James chapter 1, the first part of 15. These desires give birth to sinful actions. Now we have moved from emotions, where desires live, to the intellect, where our will and actions live. James changes the picture from hunting and fishing to the birth of a baby. Desire conceives a way of taking the bait. The will approves, and then the body acts. The result is sin. Whether you feel it or not, you have been hooked and you are trapped. Christian living is a matter of the will, not feelings. I've heard Christians say, "I don't feel like reading the Bible," or "I don't feel like praying or attending church." You know, the thing is though, that children operate on the basis of feelings. Adults operate on the basis of will. The more you exercise your will in saying no to temptation, the more God will take control of your life. The 4 stages of sin: stage 1, desire; stage 2, enticement; stage 3, disobedience; our last stage, number 4, death. James 1:15. These desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. Now the thing is, this death, it might take years for the sin to mature, but when it does, the result will be death. Whenever you are faced with temptation, get your eyes off the bait and look ahead to the consequences of sin. Romans 6:23. For the wages of sin is death. Another thing to consider if we are going to be overcomers, overcome temptation, is to consider God's goodness. James chapter 1, verse 17. Whatever is good and perfect is a gift coming down to us from God our Father, who created all the lights in the heavens. He never changes or casts a shifting shadow. One of the enemy's tricks is to try to convince us that God is holding out on us, that he doesn't really love us or even care about us. Once we start doubting God's goodness, we will be attracted to Satan's offers and then take his bait. James presents 4 facts about the goodness of God. God gives only good gifts. If it comes from God, it must be good, even if you don't see the goodness immediately. Paul's thorn in the flesh was a strange gift, but it became a tremendous blessing to Paul. The way God gives is good. When God gives a blessing, He does it in a loving way. What He gives and how He gives, they're both good. He gives constantly. The word translated coming down, it's in a present participle form. It means it just keeps on coming. Even if we don't see His gifts, He still sends them to us. God does not change. He is the unchanging God. This means we should never question His love or doubt His goodness when difficulties come or temptations appear. If we are to mature, and that's what James is writing about, we must face testings and temptations. And that is what we're looking at here. Things to consider if we are going to overcome temptation. The first is to consider God's judgment. The second is to consider God's goodness. And the third is to consider God's divine nature in us. James 1:18. He chose to give birth to us by giving us His true word. And we, out of all creation, became His prized possession. It's interesting here, James, pictures that he used. He used birth as a picture of desire leading to sin and death. And then he also used it to explain how we can have victory over sin and temptation. This second birth is divine. It's from God. Nicodemus thought he had to re-enter his mother's womb to be born again, and he was so wrong. It's the work of God. Just like we had no part in our own human birth, it's all God. When we put our faith in Jesus, it's God who performs the miracle of this new birth, not us. Everything, it's all on Him. Everything He has done, nothing that we do. By granting us this new birth, God declares that He cannot accept the old birth. Throughout the Bible, God rejects the firstborn and accepts the second. He accepted Abel and not Cain, Isaac and not Ishmael, Jacob and not Esau. God rejects your first birth, and He announces that you need a second birth. Now, this new birth helps us overcome temptation. If we let the old nature from our first birth take over, we will fail. But if we yield to the new nature, the new birth, we will succeed. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17. This means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone, a new life has begun. As we are in the Word daily, every day, we will become stronger to fight the battles we face. No matter what excuses we make, we have no one to blame for sin but ourselves. We can't say the devil made me do it. Right? I stepped into it. I did it. The next right thing in your spiritual walk is to consider these three things when faced with temptation: God's judgment, God's goodness, and God's divine nature in you.